Welcome back to Cooking with Gerry. First thing I want to say is if you watched the previous video where I gave a list of 10 healthy foods you must eat after having watched a YouTube video by Dr. Sten Ekberg, E-K-B-E-R-G. I forgot one of the 10, and that one is fats and oils. Very healthy, very good for the body. My sincerest apologies to Dr. Ekberg for having forgot that one item of the 10. So, after having taken care of that mistake, we're going to make another bread today, which isn't really bread because I don't use yeast and I try to minimize the amount of wheat flour. But I need to use some wheat flour because the cooking method, I am using a grill with hot embers and I need to remove the bread batter from the tray about halfway through cooking time because the cooking method isn't as efficient as an oven. So a little bit of wheat flour helps hold the batter together so that I can flip it over to the other side. If you have an oven, you can minimize or even not use wheat flour. The reason why I try not to use wheat flour is because it's very processed and very quickly turns to sugar once it enters your stomach. But I have lots of other ingredients that are going to go into the bread which will slow down that conversion process into sugar. So let's get started. Here, first of all, a little bit of prep beforehand. There's 4 tablespoons of a mixture of powder I have of quinoa and amaranth. So 4 tablespoons, 1 tablespoon of maca root powder, considered one of those superfoods, and 1 tablespoon of 7 seeds flour, a combination of seeds that have been ground so fine it acts like a flour. That's in here, and I also put 20 tablespoons of the broth from a soup I made earlier, which had lentils, split peas, and red corn. So those went all together, and the liquid, the bean broth, was still hot. Not boiling. I had turned the heat off about 15 minutes prior, but it was still hot. So I mixed those ingredients together and I covered it, and they've been here for about 3 hours as the powders absorb that bean broth. So from here I have 2 eggs that I'm going to beat a little bit just to make it easier to mix everything together. And that's going in with the powders, and I'll use my spatula so to minimize the waste. And I learned from one of my uncles to remove the smell of raw egg. Use just plain white vinegar, which I'll use on this plate when it comes time for cleaning. So now I'm also going to add about half a teaspoon of pink salt, maybe 3/4 of a teaspoon. I like bread to be a little bit salty. And here I have virgin olive oil. I think it'll be about 2 tablespoons. And then I'm going to mix it once again with the fork. So the powders that were soaking for 3 hours, they're not solid, it's like a paste. But this, if you were to put in the oven, would come out a very moist and much healthier bread than the usual bread you find at your store. So from here, with my dry spoon, I have wheat flour, just white wheat flour. I'm going to put 2 tablespoons, and here I have whole wheat flour. Again, 2 tablespoons. And here I have what's called sacha inchi powder. It's a nut similar to almond flour, I guess, in terms of the numbers, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, etc. This sacha inchi is grown, I believe, in the Andes. So I'm going to add 3 tablespoons. This is processed, so it will quickly turn into sugar, but the sugar quantity is very low, especially compared to the regular wheat flour. And then I want to put about half a tablespoon of baking soda. You see there are clumps sometimes. It's important to remove the clumps so that you don't get these pockets of clumped baking soda with a biteful. So I just broke that up. So instead of using yeast, I use baking soda. I have learned recently that yeast can ferment in the stomach, causing air and digestion problems. So I don't use yeast anymore when I make bread. So now the consistency is a bit thicker. Can you see? Probably not. There you go. But still not thick enough. I learned from the previous 2 experiences with making bread. One was a really tasty coconut bread. If it's too liquidy, it's going to stick to the oven paper, which I don't want. So I'm going to add 1 more tablespoon of each of the wheat flours and 1 more tablespoon of the sacha inchi powder. Now, we've done bread recipes before, but this one is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to add the lentils and the split peas from the soup I made earlier. I've said many times you can add many ingredients: fruit, fresh fruit, dried fruit, vegetables, you can add meat, you can add cheese, but I have never done it with a video because this cooking method I need the batter to be solid. But I want to try it. So here I drained all the liquid out that I'll use for something later. And it's less than a cup of cooked lentils and split peas that I made earlier. Those are going in. And I'll move this out of the way if I have space right there. Then I'm going to mix this all together. So the lentils and the split peas will add some nutrition. They are still fairly high in the sugar content, but they have fiber and vitamins and minerals. So that's the batter. Now here I have a very shallow round dish you could use for small pizzas or a small pie. And I'm going to empty the batter into the tray. And I'll use my spatula. I've spoken about numerous times. Very useful tool in the kitchen. For your Teflon pan, for example. But also for cleaning the bowl. There will be very little residual batter on the bowl after I can clean it with this spatula. I recommend you invest in a decent spatula. Try not to, if possible, get the cheaper versions where the plastic doesn't bend. This is more of a rubber than a plastic. So it hugs the corners, it hugs the circular shape of the bowl and the frying pan. And then I just want to flatten it down, evenly distribute it in this flat circular oven tray. This is still a little bit liquidy, but not as much as the previous two breads that I made, so hopefully it'll come out nice and clean when I have to do that half-time flip. So as even as possible, cleaning off the fork. And there are some raised edges from the fork, but I like that. It'll make them a bit crispier. And then I'm just banging it down a little bit to get it flat. I'll move this out of the way so you can see, and I have a new piece of tin foil. The previous one I used 5 or 6 times. So you can recycle the tin foil and not have to use new every time. If you're doing this in an oven, you probably don't need the tin foil, but a suggestion has been before, if you're going camping and you want to make fresh bread or fresh cake. This could be a cake if I add something sweet to it, like sugar and chocolate chips or granola or fresh fruit or dried fruit. But I need to insulate it to maximize as much as possible the heat that's going to be coming up from the hot embers. And here is an old piece that I've used numerous times. I just want to put it as an extra very thin protective layer between the cake tin and the fire, which I'll show you. I put the fire outside today. And then you fold it over and try to seal the batter inside by just folding over the edges of the tin foil. So that's the preparation, and now I'll stop the video so I can set up the camera outside, and I'll show you how it's going to cook. Okay, so here we are. I'm on the ground, and I have here, I'll show you, I put this on this plate, this grill of iron bars, about 10 minutes before, just so that it could heat up and be hot for when I want to put the bread on. So underneath here, this is a very thick steel frying pan I've used numerous times now. I put this iron grill as a protection, and then this is also protection, so that the heat doesn't directly get to the bread, because I think that would burn the bottom of the bread. And so here the bread is going to go on this, and I'm going to reseal because it came apart a little bit. And then I use this giant saucepan lid to try and contain the heat. And now in about 35 or 40 minutes, we're going to come back and I'll show you. And then what we have to do is remove the insulating tin foil, peel off the oven paper, and put the bread back on the grill with the top side down. So we'll see you soon. So it's been an hour. I checked the batter at about 35 minutes and the top was still a bit too moist. So I waited an hour, and also at 35 minutes it started to rain, which is not a big deal because it was covered by that giant saucepan lid. it just cooled things off a little bit, and luckily it wasn't a heavy rain, and it lasted only about 10 minutes. So here it is. It looks great. It took a bit longer because there's more batter than I normally use, and also because of the moisture content a bit higher than normal, having the cooked lentils and split peas. If you don't want to go through the process of cooking the beans, you can probably find them in a can. Also, chickpeas would be tasty, also known as garbanzo beans. So now the process is, I have it here resting on a broken piece of ceramic tile, so the heat doesn't get to the wood. And I also want to apologize. I watched the segment in between, and I realized that you couldn't actually see what I was doing because the plastic bags with the flowers were in the way. Here I have the other part of the meal. It's celery and broccoli stock that went in first, with some water and 2 tablespoons of virgin coconut oil that were in the frying pan. Same method we've done many times. Those two cooked, the stock of the broccoli and the celery, for about 5 minutes, and then I added a little bit of pumpkin and the broccoli flour, and that's good enough for me. The timing's not going to work out. This will be a little bit cold, but I can reheat it by the time this is done. So this is the next part of the process. I need my glove. It's beside the camera. Excuse my absence, because the oven tin is still going to be hot. So this is a grill I'm going to use. It'll raise it above that layer of aluminum that's on the fire. And carefully, I'm going to flip it over, remove the ceramic tile, remove the aluminum foil, and remove the cake tin. And now let's see if the oven paper comes off nicely or if it's going to stick. Yeah, it's sticking. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this back on the fire. I'm going to stir the embers a little bit just to make sure that they're going to be evenly burned and there's even heat, more heat. This will probably take about 20 more minutes. And then I'll reheat the veggies and have a really tasty and nutritious lunch. So I'll show you what it looks like when it's done in about 20 minutes. Alright, about 15 minutes after I put the bread back on the fire, and I'll show you, I cut a quarter of it. It smells great, looks good, very moist. It's going to be very tasty. But the wood outside, it's not so hot anymore, so it's not fully cooked. But I don't want to wait, so I've cut it into half, and I'm cutting it down the middle. Here I have on low heat about half a tablespoon of salted butter, and this will finish off the cooking necessary. Getting that middle part cooked. With the grilling method, the middle of the bread doesn't get cooked as the outside, so that's why I put it back. And sometimes I'll even cut it as I'm doing now and put it on the grill. But I am really hungry. I don't want to wait, so I'm going to do it this way. And I'll let that cook in the butter for about 5 minutes. I'll flip it over once, and here I'm going to reheat the vegetables. And I have in this Tupperware the liquid, the broth from the lentils and the split peas, and I have the red corn that I told you about. putting it into the frying pan that has the celery, the broccoli, and the pumpkin, and there's a bit of liquid which will be great for the bread to soak up. So that's gonna continue cooking for a little bit. That was the bread made with lentils and split peas. Lots of different options. Peanuts would go great if you want to put oat flakes or any kind of nut or seed, especially if you're putting it in the oven. I don't use much of the dried nuts and seeds like pumpkin seeds, sunflower seed. If you can find hemp seed, that's also really healthy. I don't use those when I cook the bread over the grill because many times those seeds fall off, especially if I do the cutting in the middle, the cutting halfway, so that the middle part of the batter can reach closer to the heat. Sometimes those seeds and nuts fall off, and I prefer that not to happen. So that's normally why I don't put, I have before, I put some raisins in the last time, and the raisins that were on the outer edge, the top part of the bread, they got a little bit burnt, but not too burnt. So then watch, I just flip it over. Oh, I got a nice butter grill, and the flavor of the butter. And that'll go for 2 or 3 more minutes. I'll flip it one more time because it's the middle part that needs to be cooked more than the outside part. So here's my lunch. Looking forward to it. And thanks for joining. There has been a bit of thunder, so hopefully it doesn't start for at least 15-20 more minutes so the bread can continue to cook outside. And I suggest really try it. It's very tasty. It can be great to go with any meal as a side dish, or it can be great for breakfast, or use it as a sandwich. If you imagine that big round piece, cut it down the middle, and you put your favorite ingredients inside, and then add some cheese in the middle or even cheese on top. Put it back in the oven on the grill or the broil. You'll get that cheese to be toasted, brown, bubbling, really tasty. Please try it. Much healthier than anything you'll find at your grocery store.